Hello, and welcome back to Brian Blog, and we continue discussing Judge Sabo's Read on Authority. We are now in Section 10 on the Jura Federation. That's my Section 10. It's actually not numbered like that. A, a little background for the Jura Federation when we go into this. Jura Federation was an Bakuninist faction of the International, of the First International, that formed during the anti-statist split. It's named after a Swiss area known for watchmakers who tended to be anti-state and egalitarian, but petit bourgeois. Uh, the Art Federation formed between the International Socialist Congresses of 1869 and 1871, with the International's first council led by the Marxists suppressed the Bakuninists. The Jura Federation organized an international of the disaffected federations at the 1872 Saint Emir Congress. The Congress disavowed the General Council's authoritarian consolidation of power, centralism, and planning as an affront to the International and its federalist orientation. The Jura Federation remained the home of Bakunin, and they became people who largely debated the efficacy of propaganda by the deed and stuff that would later be associated with Barrett's communism. So it's a mixed legacy. The Jura Federation split during the Federation Ramonda Congress of the International in January of 1869. Bakunin's faction was larger. The International General Council was Marxist. They did not recognize the Jura Federation for its relationship to Bakunin. The group was formally reinaugurated in 1871 at the Congress of Soviet. Their founding treatise, a Soviet circular, held positions against the state and against the General Council, which law charged with turning the free and autonomous parts of the International into an authoritarian hierarchy. Some major figures of the Jura group include Enrico Malatesta and Elise Reclusis and James Guillaume. And it's also generally considered to be a major inspiration on Peter Kropotkin. So the Jura Federation is kind of seen as the beginning of the Anarchist International, or the Black International. All right. In 1880, the Jura Federation adopted anarcho-communism as its official doctrine, as did many anarchists outside Spain. Spanish anarchism was more associated with syndicalism and the trade unions. And there was some debate about this, even amongst the Jura heads, for lack of a better term, about adopting communism over collectivism as the title and orientational view. So that's just some kind of encyclopedia-esque breakdown of what the Jura Federation was. All right, let's get into the Soviet circular and what Judge Sabo has to say here. All right. The Jura Federation and Soviet circular. In September 1871, the General Council of the IWA, the First International, which Marx and Engels were members, orchestrated a secretive conference in London in the place of an actual Congress, which was a normal way for the IWA to pass rules and regulations, pass resolutions, and appointing the General Council. As Engels described it, the conference was a compromise and was not provided for in the rules. That's from the General Minutes, quoted in the First Socialist Schism. That's a big source of this, but it is in the General Minutes of the First International. So, this opportunity was used by the General Council to attempt to pass a number of anti-anarchist resolutions, including the 9th resolution officially endorsing the formation of political parties and the conquest of state power. This also puts left communists in a bit of a pickle. Like Bordiga has his reading a critique of the Guerrilla program in Grudessa and some of the letters that are pretty consistent with Marx here, but and on the contrast to state power, which Bordiga had no real problem with. But the formation of political parties also Bordiga has no problem with. The left communists tend to be pretty critical of the idea of electoral participation as a means of conquesting for the state. As Engels privately admitted in a letter to Liebknecht, that's William Liebknecht, not Carl. I'm getting the two confused too. In January of 1872, well, the conference revolutions have no necessary binding force, since a conference is in itself an illegal mechanism justified only by the gravity of the situation. Publicly, however, Engels and the General Council treated the resolutions as binding on any organization within the IWA that disputed their legitimacy. In November 1871, the Jura Federation and the IWA published a critique of the General Council called the Soviet Circular. It was written by some prominent early anarchists, such as James Guillaume, as we mentioned earlier. In the circular, the Jura Federation argues that the General Council, by claiming greater authority for itself, had acted, quote, contrary to the very essence of the International, which is only an immense protest against authority. It is especially cited how the general rules of the IWA defined its end as, quote, the protection, advancement, and complete emancipation of the working classes. The goal of the emancipation was seen as proof that the opposition to authority was central to the rules they had all agreed to, and the clear stated intent of the association. In the circular, we also see a similar line of analysis given by Bakunin. For example, it points to the inevitable corruption which comes with authority. Quote, this is a Bakunin quote from the circular. If there is one incontrovertible fact born out of 1,000 times by experience, it is that authority has a corrupting effect on those in whose hands it is placed. It is absolutely impossible for a man with power over his neighbors to remain a moral man. Now, again, remember, this is one of my critiques of Bakuninism, is it tends to be moralistic. Nonetheless, while this also recognizes power as a morally corrupting force. I mean, I think it's morally corrupting, but I'm not just in the moral critique business. Back to text. It also provides a mental analysis about how the practice of ruling shapes social relations and undermines the stated aims of liberation. This method is not only critiqued as inconsistent with their ends, but is also an inappropriate means to achieving those ends. By placing themselves in the position of authority, they will recreate the system of authority through the practice and exercise of that power, as the circular puts it. We are not accusing the General Council of criminal intent. The personalities who did make it have found themselves succumbing to a fatal necessity in good faith, and to ensure the success of their own particular doctrine, they have sought to introduce the authority principle into the international. Circumstances appeared to encourage this tendency, and it strikes us as quite natural to that school, whose ideal is the conquest of political power by the working class. In wake of recent developments, should have thought that the International should have amended its original organization and become a hierarchical organization directed by and governed by a committee. But while we can understand such tendencies and such actions, we nonetheless are compelled to combat them on behalf of the social revolution, which we pursue, and its program, the emancipation of the workers by the workers themselves, freeing all directing authority, even that authority which should be elected and endorsed by the workers. This combination of authority being extended to even that which has been, quote, elected and endorsed by the workers, indicates agreement with Bakunin's critique of representative democracy as distinguished from delegation itself, or the advice of relevant experts. This is affirmed as the Jura Federation does not demand the General Council to be destroyed, but instead given its proper non-authoritative role within the structure of the IWA in respecting the autonomy of the organizations that make it up. Quote, we ask for the retention within the International of the principle of autonomy of sections, which has been the basis of our association thus far. We ask that the General Council, whose powers have been rendered unnatural by the Basel Congress's administrative resolution, should revert itself to its national function, which is a function of the simple correspondence and statistical bureau. We seek to found the unity. Some aim to build upon the centralization and dictatorship upon a free federation of autonomous groups. Taken together, we can certainly see the analysis of authority that is in harmony with that which we have seen from Bakunin. Yeah, but it's vague and implicit. I mean, it's there. I don't disagree, but it's vague and implicit. I could see how this definition of authority could be also guilty of what Ingalls is accusing it of. So we could go back and forth on that. We also see rather directly socialism being presented as immense protest against authority, somewhat similar how Ingalls describes the anti-authoritarians as launching a regular crusade against what they call the principle of authority. Yeah, we can see that. That's what I was just saying. We also see the construction of this kind of society and organization whose authority is contrasted to, namely one based on autonomy and free federation. Like Bakunin, they wish for a society that was controlled from circumstances to the center is in this case being the General Council, which would not wield authority with the right or power to command, but function as a correspondence and statistical bureau. Basically, they would facilitate everything. Malatesta's anarchy and organization. Okay, we'll probably get through part of this. Enrico Malatesta was an Italian anarchist who had been involved with the movement from its inception and rather prolific in his writings on and development of anarchist theory. While much of his writing comes after On Authority was published, he gives a good window into the more polished versions of anarchist thought, including how it understood authority. Anarchy, 1891. So this is well after the split. In his essay Anarchy, in 1891, Malatesta begins by defining his terms. That's nice. Not dialectical, but nice. He's especially focused on understanding the word anarchy itself and its relation to other forms of government or state. He defined anarchy this way, quote, "The word anarchy comes from the Greek and its literal meaning is without government. The condition of a people who live without a constituted authority, without government." This is clearly largely a negative definition, defining anarchy as the absence of something. I mean, it's in the name as an absence of something. There is an absence of constituted authority, which is identified with the government. But looking at how Malatesta described the government, we can better understand authority. Malatesta is also very particular in describing anarchy as an absence of government rather than an absence of the state. He believes the word state is vaguer, so he prefers the more exact term. In the process of explaining this, he provides a definition of a state he considers equivalent to government and is therefore constituted authority. Quote, "Anarchists, including this writer, have used the word state, and still do, to mean the sum total of political, legislative, judiciary, military, and financial institutions through which the management of their own affairs, the control over their personal behavior, and the responsibility for their personal safety are taken away from the people and entrusted to others who, by usurpation or delegation, are vested with the powers to make the laws for everything and everybody, and to oblige the people to observe them, if need be, by use of collective force. In this sense, the word state means government, or to put it another way, it is an impersonal, abstract expression of the state of affairs personified by government, and therefore the terms abolition of state, society without a state, etc. describe exactly the concept with anarchists seek to express, of the destruction of all political order based on authority, and the creation of a society of free and equal members based on the harmony of interest and the voluntary participation of everybody in carrying out social responsibilities. We can see the ways that constituted authority is expressed through various institutions here. Authority represented denying people self-management, which this is instead taken over by some other groups whose command is backed by force. In other words, it is marked by domination and is understood in contrast to a society of free and equal individuals working together voluntarily. The contrast is important because it indicates that the anarchists are trying to indicate a particular kind of social relation which they do not see as necessary for cooperation itself. Malatesta emphasizes this when he considers the meanings of the state, and therefore defining how anarchism as being anti-state instead of being anti-government may lead to misunderstanding. Quote, "The word state is often used to describe a kind of society, a particular human collectivity gathered together in a particular territory and making up what is called a social unit, irrespective of the way the members of said collectivity are grouped, are the state of relations between them. It is also used simply as a synonym for society." That's confusing, but I agree it's often used that way. And because these meanings are given the word state, opponents believe, or rather pretend to believe, that anarchists mean to abolish every social bond, all collective work, and condemn all men to living in a state of isolation, which is worse than living in the condition of savagery. Take that anarcho-capitalist, Malatesta would maybe say. Anarchists directly deny that what they're calling for is a return to isolated production or putting it into collective work or combined action. Later on, Malatesta elaborates more on how we should understand government or authority more directly. And particularly, he tries to distinguish between a metaphysical understanding of the government to an anarchist one. Quote, what is government? The metaphysical tendency which, in spite of the blows it has suffered at the hands of the positive sciences, still has a strong hold in the minds of people today, so much that many people look upon the government as a moral institution with a number of given qualities of reason, justice, equity, which are independent of the people who are in office. For them, government, and in a more vague way, the state, is the abstract social power. It is the ever abstract representative of the general interest. It is the expression of the rights of all considered as limits of the rights of each individual. And this way of conceiving government is encouraged by the interesting parties who are concerned with the principle of authority, should be safeguarded, and that it should always survive the shortcomings and mistakes committed by those who follow one another in the exercise of power. Hence, we defend the office, but not the person in it. That's a mistake, according to Malatesta. For us, the government is made up of all the governs and governors, kings, presidents, ministers, deputies, etc., who have the power to make laws regulating interhuman relations and to see that they are carried out, to levy taxes and to collect them, to impose military conscription, to judge and punish those who contravene the laws, to subject private contracts to rules, scrutiny, and sanctions, to monopolize some branches of production, and some public services are, if they so wish, all public production and all public services, to promote or to hinder the exchange of goods, to wage war, to make peace with the governors of other countries, to grant or withdraw privileges, ellipses, and so on. In short, governors are those who have the power, to greater or lesser degree, to make use of social power, that is, the physical, intellectual, and economic power of the whole community, in order to oblige everybody to carry out their wishes. And this power, in our opinion, constitutes the principle of government of authority. Like Bakunin, Malatesta recognizes that the metaphysicians seem to be using these words to mean something different than the anarchists. The former describes the government in a more vague way, mixed with the ideas they hope to achieve. This seems to be a way that makes the government a kind of a good force by definition, necessarily fighting for the general interest and upholding justice. Yeah, those are always circular, by the way. By contrast, the anarchist gives a more materialist definition of government, focused on who makes it up and its characteristic actions and functions. The government is comprised of the governors that make it up, i.e., those who use physical, intellectual, and economic social power to make others carry out their wishes. We might also refer to them as the ruling classes, maintaining and exercising a system of class domination and exploitation. This includes things like taxes, regulating, punishing, waging war, monopolizing production, such as in the form of private property. A bit later on, Malatesta describes government and these various methods of coercion in more detail. Quote, throughout history, just as in our time, government is either brutal, violent, or arbitrary rule of a few over the many, or is an organized instrument to ensure the domination and privileges will be in the hands of those who, by force, by cunning, or by inheritance, have cornered all the means of life. First and foremost, the land, which they make use to keep the people in bondage and to make them work for their benefit. There are two ways of oppressing men, either directly by force, by physical violence, or indirectly by denying them the means of life and thus reducing them to a state of surrender. The former is at the root of power, that is of political privilege. The latter is the origins of property, that is of economic privilege. Men can also be suppressed by working on their intelligence and their feelings, which constitute a religious or universalitarian power. But just as the spirit does not exist except as a resultant of material forces, so a lie and the organism set up to propagate it have no reason d'etre, except insofar as they are the results of the political and economic privileges and means to defend and to consolidate them. Okay. Malatesta describes two of the three forms of social power for who is referenced before as fundamental and relates it to various kinds of ruling classes. The most directly brutal and violent forces, and it's thus related to political privilege of politicians, the police, and military. There's also the indirect force of controlling things that people need to live and being able to force them into submission through that control, that is property and economic privilege. And this seems especially to refer to figures like landlords and capitalists today. Importantly, there is again a mere existence of violence or control over some resources, but this being used explicitly as a way of maintaining rule of the few over the many, or ensuring that the domination and privilege remain in the hands of the ruling classes above others. This is again a system of class hierarchy, relations of exploitation, domination and exploitation, which the government is systematically maintaining through these various means. Intellectual power remains an odd one out here and seems to be broadly to refer to people that being manipulated, lied to, and defrauded. It is the dominant ideology of the woman class keeping people in line. Malatesta gives this type of manipulation a secondary importance since it is mainly a way of bolstering social power of the other two kinds. Propaganda is engaged in not for its own sake, but for justifying something else. Malatesta identifies the institutions built on this type of power as being churches or universities, the cathedral or the vampire castle, depending on how reactionary you are. But we could easily see how it might extend to other institutions like the press, the entertainment industry, social media, etc., things that are broadly called PMC today. This, too, is not a condemnation of the existence of education, the press, in and of itself, but a recognition of the way, especially in a society dominated by other forms of ruling classes, becomes their tool, even the center of power in their own right. Malatesta does not believe that government is static, and the ruling classes using these types of power can take various forms. He also elaborates on the origins of government and how he sees it within modern capitalist society. He begins with this in the most basic form. Long quote. It is sparsely populated primitive societies with uncomplicated social relations, and any situation which prevented the establishment of habits, customs, or solidarity, and of which destroyed existing ones or established the domination of man by man. Two powers, political and economic, were found in the same hands, which could then be those of a single man. Those who by force have defeated and intimidated others, deposed the persons and the belongings of the defeated, and obliged them to serve and to work for them, and obey their will in all respects. They are at the same time landowners, kings, judges, and executioners. The government is able to establish itself when the solidarity between people is replaced by domination of man by man. The government, given the relative simplicity of the situation, is able to consolidate the power into a very few hands. A king can be considered both as a ruler, commanding an army, but also as a landlord, literally the lord of the land, demanding the tribute and payment of taxes, aka state rents. This is both a physical and economic power are in the hands of a single man institution. The question which came first here is also somewhat pointless because the way in which the forms of power are mutually reinforcing. Physical force is used to take control of key resources, and control of those resources is the basis of that force's strength. The question of which this sort of relation is maintained only in a relatively simple society. The more complex things become, the more unstable this kind of situation is, and the more necessary it becomes for different types of power to form distinct classes. These rulers are united to some respect in their common interest in ruling, but each with its supreme rule in their own respective area, having things are divided up to exploit others as much as they can and order others around as they see fit. In this way, the property-owning class is distinguished from the political class. Furthermore, because the owning class controls the key resources and scope of the society they dominate, they become the more powerful of the ruling classes as well, with the political rulers being reduced to enforcers of their rule, aka what do you think Congress does? Long quote from Malatesta. Thus, in the shadow of power for its protection and support, unbeknown to it, and for the reasons beyond its control, private wealth, that is, the owning class is developed. The latter, gradually concentrating in the hands of the means of production, the real sources of life, agriculture, industry, barter, etc., end up by establishing their own power, which, by the reason of their superiority of its means and by the variety of interests in which it embraces, always ends up more or less openly subjugating the political power, which is the government, and making it into its own gendarme. This phenomenon has occurred many times in history, whether as a result of invasion or military enterprise, physical, brutal force has gained the upper hand in society. The conquerors have shown the tendency to concentrate government and property in their own hands. But it's always the government's need to win the support of the powerful class and demands of production, the impossibility of controlling and directing everything have resulted in the reestablishment of private property, the division of two powers, and with it, the dependence of those who control force, governments, on those who control the very source of force, the property owners. The governor inevitably ends by becoming the owner's gendarme. This remains a key point of Malatesta's view of government, especially in its modern form, as we seem to distinguish government from the private sector. For Malatesta, the economic aspect, and by extension, the property-only classes, are the more fundamental, since they control the very material source on which the state power rests. The material mode of production also necessitates the creation of such classes due to the increased size and complexity of society. Notice this complexity comes up again. It is not an arbitrary act of will by the state, as if capitalists only had this property by the state's favor, even if, of course, it does exercise some influence in certain legal and juridical forms or impose certain relations through conquest. Malatesta especially believes evident within capitalism. Especially believes this evident within capitalism. The state predates capitalism, so capital cannot explain the origins of the state itself. But capitalism has influenced, at points even through a revolution, the forms of the state that exist and remains a more fundamental force in society. Long quote from Malatesta. But never has this phenomenon been more accentuated than in modern times. The development of production, the vast expansion of commerce, the immensible power assumed by money, and all the economic questions stemming from the discovery of the America, from the invention of machines, etc., have guaranteed the supremacy of the capitalist class, which, no longer content with enjoying the support of the government, demanded that the government should arise from its own ranks. A government which owed its origins to the right of conquest, divine right of kings, as their priests called it, though subjugated by existing circumstances to the capitalist class, went on maintaining a proud and contemptuous attitude towards the now wealthy former slaves, and had pretensions to independence of domination. That government was indeed the defender, the property owner's gendarme, but a kind of gendarme who think they are somebody and behave in an arrogant manner towards the people they help escort and defend when they don't rob or kill them at the next corner. And the capitalist state got rid of it, or in the process of doing so, doing by means fair and foul, and replacing it by a government of its own choosing, consisting of members of its clone class, all times under the control and specifically organized to defend class against any possible demands of the disinherited. The modern parliamentary system begins here. Okay, we're going to finish this section and then move on. The control of the property classes have over their government is not an accident, nor is it solved through reforms of universal suffrage, which only gives the people the illusion of sovereignty. Cough, cough. The property owner's control is based on its control over the material mode of production the state finds itself the source of life in. Supposing, for the sake of argument, that the political rulers really trying to exercise control against the owning classes, or if democracy became something more than mere illusionary control, the owning classes would use their control of the resources to bring the government back into line or replace it with one of their own liking. Electoralism is a false hope, diverting the activity from the most oppressed population into a doomed project. The government cannot be reformed away from oppression because it is its most essential and defining characteristic. Long quote of Malatesta. The basic function of government everywhere and all times, whatever title it adopts and whatever its origins and organization may be, is always that of oppressing and exploiting the masses, of defending the oppressors and the exploiters. Of its principle, its characteristics and indispensable instruments are the police agent and the tax collector, the soldier and the gaoler, to whom must inevitably be added the traitor in lies, be he priest or schoolmaster, remunerated or protected by the government to be enslaved the minds and make them directly accept the yoke. This is not to say the government cannot adopt other functions too, with some of which generally beneficial to society. Society that is too awful will undermine even the government's own power, as it could not long survive, just like how only the still living may get sick. Thus, government will recognize and enforce certain basic rights and organize certain useful services like a post office or roads or hospitals, etc., while ultimately motivated by the desire for domination. To this extent, this takes place in the regulation of activities of the property owners themselves, who are in competition between themselves, are stepping to act as a mediator between them and the rulers to prevent the exploited from taking matters into their own hands. Its fundamental purpose remains the same. All this is the natural inevitable consequence of social relations built on competition, with the conflicting interests where one can only gain at the expense of another, aka the problem of zero-sum games. He who looks forward to the future society as our social instinct grows and becomes more universal based on the principle of solidarity and a system based upon the appropriate harmony of interest with the free development of each as a condition for the free development of all. Rather than seeing our liberty limited by others, we would find it expanded through them. Quote, solidarity, that is the harmony of interest and our feeling, the coming together of individuals for the well-being of all, and all for the well-being of each, is the only environment in which man, capital M, can express his personality and achieve his optimum development and enjoy his greatest possible well-being. This goal towards the human evolution advances and is the highest principle, which resolves all existing antagonisms that would otherwise be insoluble and results in the freedom of each not being limited but complemented, and indeed finding the necessary reason d'etre in the freedom of others. End long quote. This stance clearly parallels what we saw in Bakunin and in his revolutionary catechism, where the freedom of each is expanded and confirmed in others. Malatesta believes this is the only possible in a society which has abolished the types of class divisions and antagonisms which come from them. The society of solidarity is incompatible with the state as an institution of class domination and exploitation. Malatesta is therefore rather dismissive of those authoritarians who believe that socialism is incompatible with the state. If we abolish class divisions, the state would either need to reestablish them or it will die out. Asterisk. Lenin even agrees with this on asterisk. Organ and function are inseparable terms. Take from an organ its function, and either the organ dies or the function is reestablished. Put an army in a country where there is neither reasons for nor fear of war, civil or external, and it will provoke war, or if it does not succeed in its intentions, it will collapse. A police force where there is no crimes or criminals to apprehend will invent both, or it ceases to exist. Similar to Bakunin's analysis of the corruption that comes with the being placed in the position of authority in the exercise of power, Malatesta believes so-called socialist state would see its leaders act in a way that maintains their privileged status within society. Quote, one quote from Malatesta, a government that is a group of people entrusted with making laws and empowered to use collective power to oblige each individual to obey them is already privileged class and cut off from the people. As any constituted body would do, it is instinctively seeking to extend its power to beyond public control, to impose its own policies, and to give priority to its special interest, having put in a privileged position. The government is already at odds with the people whose strength it deposes of, unquote. Unlike relinquishing its power, the new socialist government would still need to appeal to some part of the population for support, capturing key resources and recreating class division and a system of oppression and exploitation. The government constituted authority is therefore destructive to any real socialist society. Malatesta additionally believes that certain essential functions the government does carry out now can be done, likely even better, and anarchy, including large-scale production that requires combined action. Instead of the state association or capitalist association, a society based on the harmony of interest would have associations which, inspired by love of one's fellow being or by passion for the science, are simply more desire to enjoy oneself and to be applauded. Voluntary sources of this kind already exist and would take on much larger role at a worldwide scale. If not for the obstacles presented by state and private property or the impotence people feel in the vast exploitation carried out by a few. Malatesta pointed this out as well to the examples of railways, which can be done on a voluntary basis in a society where the work is made enjoyable and people feel the need for them. For this to be possible, there would need to be some measure of administration. Malatesta agrees that combined action requires some degree of coordination between people. We see that coming up again. And therefore, people need to be given the task of facilitating cooperation. His care for the one against the authoritarian tendency to create administration with government would constitute an authority. Long quote. Of course, that every large collective undertaking and division of labor, technical management, administration is necessary. But authoritarians clumsily play on words to produce a raison d'etre for the government out of the very real need for the organization of work. Government, it is well to repeat, is the concourse of individuals who had or have seized the right and the means to make laws and to oblige people to obey. The administrator, the engineer, etc., are people who are appointed or assume the responsibility to carry out a particular job and do so. Governments mean the delegation of power, that is, the abdication of initiative and sovereignty of all into the hands of a few. Administration means the delegation of work, That is, tasks given and received, free strings of services based on free agreement. The governor is a privileged person since he has the right to command others and to make others make use of the efforts of others to make his ideas and personal wishes prevail. The administrator, the technical director, etc., are workers like the rest. That is, of course, in a society in which everyone has equal means to develop and that all are or can be at the same time intellectual and manual workers. The only difference remaining between those are those which stem from the natural diversity of aptitudes, and that all jobs, all functions, give an equal right to enjoyment of social possibilities. Let us not confuse the function of government with that of administration, for they are essentially different, and today they are often confused. Still today, they are often confused. It is only because of economic and political privilege. Malatesta seems to make clear the distinction between authority and someone entrusted with the commission of administration. This is not merely a change in names either, but many material distinctions, namely in ways in which the authority involves seizing power and a right to command based on the economic and political privilege, in contrast to someone done carrying on a voluntary basis. As described here, it is the distinction between a delegation of power and a delegation of work. Likewise, Molotov is also careful to distinguish authority as well as anarchist conceptions of freedom from truly antisocial acts that destroy the freedom of others, as if anarchists must respect liberty to their own slaves. As if anarchists must respect the liberty to own slaves. Yeah, I thought I read that wrong. To hold this view, he says, is completely misrepresent to hold this view is completely misrepresent the anarchist position. Long quote. And to what police and of justice? Many suppose that if there's no carabiners, policemen of judgments, everyone would be free to kill, to ravish, to harm others, as the mood took one. And the anarchists, in the name of principles, would wish to see their strange liberty respected, which violates and destroys the freedom and life of others. They seem almost to believe that having brought down a government and private property would allow both to be quietly built up again because of respect for freedom of those who might feel the need to be rulers and the property owners. A truly curious way of interpreting our ideas. And of course, it is easier to brush them off with a shrug of the shoulders than to take the trouble of confuting them. The freedom we want for ourselves and for others is not an absolute metaphysical abstract freedom, which is in practice and inevitably translated into the oppression of the weak, aka Isaiah Berlin, freedom for the wolves is death to sheep. But it is real freedom, possible freedom, in which a conscious community of interest, voluntary solidarity. We proclaim the maxim, do as you wish, and with it almost surmises our program, for we maintain, and it doesn't take much to understand why, that in a harmonious society, in a society without government and without property, each one will want what he must do. We have another clarification. Malatesta earlier agreed with Bakunin's position from Revolutionary Catechism that the freedom of each not being limited to but comprehended by the freedom of others. This does not, however, imply that anarchists embrace the metaphysical abstract freedom to do absolutely anything, including the oppression of the weak. It is real freedom founded on the equal freedom of others that they support and champion. The real does a lot of work for anarchists in a way that's a little bit hard to let slip. We can deal with this at another time, but it is something that's actually often bothered me. Like, there is this idea of a real unmediated thing of which you are progressing, at least in Bakuninite forms of anarchism, that that one makes me a little bit uncomfortable. To achieve anarchy, Malatesta believes we must have one path forward: violent revolution by the people, doing away with both the state and the economic class divisions on which it is built. Long quote. In order to solve the social problem for the benefit of everyone, there is only one means: to crush those who have the social wealth by revolutionary action, and to put everything at the disposal of everybody, and leave all the forces, the ability, and the goodwill that exist amongst people free to act and provide for the needs of all. We struggle for anarchy and for socialism because we believe that anarchy and socialism must be realized immediately. That is to say that in a revolutionary act, we must drive the government away, abolish property, and trust public services, which is in this context will include all social life to the spontaneous, free, not official, not authorized efforts of all interested parties and of all willing helpers. And this would have to be done. This is Varn talking. This would have to be done all over the world at one time. Of course, there would be difficulties and drawbacks, but they will be resolved. Of course, yeah, they will be resolved. They will only be resolved in the anarchist way by means, that is, of the direct intervention of interested parties and by free agreements. Okay. There's a way in which the maxim that a friend of mine says that anarchists want their political opposition just to go away is actually betrayed by that. Nonetheless, I think it does actually deal with the fact that the stuff that Engels is accusing them of is still unfair. I mean, we can critique anarchists here for some of the stuff in Malatesta, although Malatesta is a very clear writer and kind of not as guilty of the vagaries and paradoxes of some of Bakunin's style. But we can see here where there might be problems, and yet again, Engels' on authority doesn't address them. Addresses something completely different. It's kind of a bait and switch. We'll be back. We have to deal with Malatesta's organization from 1897, and then we'll get into some stuff as we've now rounded the corner and we're approaching the end, probably only in 4 or 5 more episodes of dealing with this long piece. This is a very long piece. And we'll come back to some of JudgeSabo's work after this. Have a great day.